How you doing?
Doing good. How about you?
Oh, good, thanks. Good, thanks.
If I'm allowed to ask, what part of California are you based in?
Yeah, I'm down in Southern California and San Diego, specifically Carlsbad.
Nice. How's the weather been?
It hasn't really been that much of a hot summer, but we started getting a little heat now. But it's been nice, a little humid.
I can imagine. Here in
Yeah.
Ohio, it's been very humid today recently.
Yes. I'm trying to think the last time I've been to Ohio. 2 years ago, I went to Ohio to. There was a barn, a giant barn, maybe 3,000. Well, I would consider a giant barn, 3,000 square foot barn, a basement of a house, and inside the house, and a pawn shop, all with games that they were liquidating. So it's pretty. That's the last time I was, probably a couple of years ago.
Nice,
That
nice.
was my experience of Ohio.
That is very, very cool.
Yeah.
And speaking of pawn shops and retro themes, what exactly is Broken Arcade? Is it a hobby or is it a arcade where people could come and play video games?
Yeah, good question. Broken Arcade is just a name. I started collecting back in 2015 and didn't know much about it. And pretty much every game I found from that point on was broken. So it was just a silly name I came up with on an Instagram handle that was like, had about 300 followers, just for myself and some, nerdy friends to just share our collection with. And so it's a private collection. It's a hobby. It's just games in my garage, but I've built the collection out and started sharing it with others more prominently online. So that's Broken Arcade, and that's a little bit of the origin of that.
And is it just arcade games or is it video games as well? Because like on your Instagram, you seem to have the combination of arcade consoles and video games, like the early Nintendo video games.
Yeah, I mean, it's Broken Arcade is a culmination of the items that I remember from childhood distilled down into like Atari 2600, the NES console, which you just mentioned, and then 80s and a couple 90s arcade games.
Nice. And do you fix most of these games yourself, or do you have helpers?
Yeah. Yeah, I fix most of them myself. I mean, helpers would maybe other people in the community. There's a couple websites out there, klov.com for one. Is where I got a lot of help. Originally asking questions just like you would in a forum. Now it's Facebook groups along with that. So there's no team of people or outsourced or paid third parties besides when the game boards break. I'm not very good at that. And there's really only a select few people who can fix these game boards that are actually good at it. So um, but any electronics, any cabinet damage, wiring things up, I can do that. It's the game boards themselves that is I am not equipped to, and you need some to really troubleshoot those properly. You need some more advanced tools. Advanced meaning tools back from the 70s and 80s, and some knowledge.
I Let me tell you, my dad grew up in the 70s and 80s. So all the arcade games, I was showing him some of your videos, and he definitely loved the videos. He was like, "Oh yeah, I had that. I had that. Oh, I remember playing that in the arcade."
Nice, nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's what I think a lot of people collect, no matter where you're at in time. It's you pick off a slice of good memories, and the first game I got was Miss Pac-Man, as I mentioned back in 2015. I didn't even know you could buy these things. I'm like, I remember that game from the steakhouse, when we were kids, and I got that one, fixed it up, and it just went from there. And they're like little nostalgic art pieces. It's a slice of time when things were simple and fun, and you remember that time when with your parent or parents where things were where you weren't really thinking about the other things in the world you know and
oh, I'm
it's
sorry.
they bring back a lot of good memories.
Nice. Have you ever thought about collecting a virtual headset, like a virtual reality headset from the 1980s?
No, I'm not really. The only really one I'd be familiar with was, I think, Vectrex had a game, which had a type of headset where things look 3D, but I'm not really familiar with any headsets. I don't remember seeing one. Now I'm really interested in this 3D headset from the 80s. Do you have
Oh, I'm
one?
sorry. I'm sorry.
Do you have one?
I don't have one, but I just watched two movies recently. I've seen it before, but I was in the mood the other day, and that just put me in mind to ask the question. I was looking up to see how far they went back, but the movies was The Matrix is a big one, and Don't Worry, Darling, because that takes place in a virtual reality world in the 1950s, which was a movie that came out last year with Harry Styles and the talented Florence Pugh. And I was doing some research last night, going like, how far did virtual reality go far back? Like, besides just today with the headset and goggles, like how far has this been around for a long time, or is this like brand new? It just got me thinking. And I saw that there were some virtual headsets back in the 80s, so it just made me curious. Have you collected a headset yet, or thinking about collecting a headset at some point?
No, I mean when we were kids, we had a little viewer. You know, you may have seen it. It was a little red viewer. You could put it had a little disc with slides on it, and you'd like click it like this, and it was a picture, and that was like ooh, and some were 3D, but no, nothing like an Oculus or a Vive or anything that we'd be familiar with today. That would be like super high tech, I guess. Yeah, but I'm actually getting into shooting some VR 180 video, which I don't know if you're familiar. Looks very 3D in a headset, and there's not a lot of arcade content, so I think that'll be interesting because the games look really. A lot of the games in the garage look pristine in the video, or some of them look just like they're perfect shape, but you're not really seeing them up close. I mean, you kind of are, but it's not translating the same. You don't see the cigarette burns and the scrapes the same way you would in the headset. So it'll be interesting for that content to come out. But yeah, short story. No, I've never seen those. I'm going to look it up after this to go see what kind of headsets they had.
Nice. And what was the inspiration behind that? Like, what was the exact moment and the exact in the right time when you decided that, oh, I want to go ahead and turn my garage into an arcade from the 1980s?
Yeah, it was when I ran out of space, so we just said this thing is now an arcade. Um, yeah, like I said, was collecting these items, and we don't park in there anymore, and I said, oh, I'll have a couple games in the garage, and it was really in Halloween. We opened up the garage, and the neighbors would come by, and everyone in my neighborhoods were all pretty close, and it's a nice neighborhood, and so we came in and played arcade games, and the neighbors would come over during the Halloween. It just kind of grew.
Nice.
Like it brings back good memories for myself and others. It's so nice to see other people, share those memories with their kids and just relive that moment. See, video games this is the beginning of the history of video games. Like nothing like this exists. It seems absurd to have such a small, crude lines and sounds in a giant wooden box. It just, if you describe it, it sounds ridiculous, but you're controlling a television set. So back when we were kids, this was like amazing technology. So I decided that I'm going to keep collecting these and preserve some of that history and pick off the ones from childhood and maybe some others that I learned and found interesting. And, that's where I started sharing it with others on Instagram. So it's, yeah, say about 2016, about a year into it, I decided, okay, I'm hooked. I'm going to keep this going. And the garage was my palette. So
It's very cool.
yeah.
And besides these arcade machines being in your garage, now in your Instagram videos, you also share videos of a 1980s bedroom with the box TV and Nintendo's video games. Is that also decorated in the garage as well, or is that decorated in another part of your house?
No, that's another room in the house. It's basically one wall. If you panned around, you'd see that it's a regular, but I have the wood paneling back against one wall, an old um, shelf set up and an old TV. So it brings back some of those memories and a couple, peppered in there, some of the things that we know and love from the 80s, like some Star Wars toys, Garbage Pail Kids, things like that. But that's a room in the house.
I've been trying to build a room like that for quite some time. And actually, besides illustrating, I make miniatures, and I'm actually
Nice.
working on an animated film. And the film is meant to look like it came out in the 1980s, even though it takes place modern day. It's made to look like it came out in the 1980s. And
Very cool.
really, and someday, really want to build like a miniature stop motion animation 1980s living room, like from the 1980s with that
Yeah,
future
that'd be sweet.
nostalgia.
What would you put in it?
Well, it's hard to tell what you would put in it because like some of the things are would be copyright infringement. I think it would be things that would be made up for
And have
for
that sweet 80s vibe
yeah.
and it would capture that time just by looking at it, but nothing like super specific. But
No,
you
nothing like super speed. I mean, in the film that I'm working on at the moment, it's called Orlando Monster, and it takes place at a hotel. It's about a family that's taking a vacation, and they're being hunted by by a swamp creature that's like the combination of an alligator, swamp thing, Vecna from Stranger Things, and he has 3 tentacles on his back. So it's a very scary, fearsome creature, but it's stop motion animated, and
Right.
it's basically the family trying to survive the night from not getting killed by this creature. But most of the rooms that are being filmed in is basically a hotel room and a cabin and yeah, stuff
Now,
like
is
that.
this your film?
It's my film. I wrote a screenplay last year. It made it to 3 festivals. Screenplay made it to 3 festivals, and we also have a book version coming out next year. And then
Very
the
nice.
film version will be out in 2025 or 2026. It kind of depends. We actually start animation next month. We just wrapped up voiceover.
Oh, congrats. I can't wait to check it out.
Thank you.
Sounds really cool,
And
man. That's a lot of work. I don't think
oh yes,
the average person realizes how much, unless you've seen how many different disciplines there are in putting a good product together or an art piece like that. It's a lot of effort from the music and picking out the right music. It's rare you see bad music in a movie, but music is a good heartbeat of the production, and obviously a good story. And you combine all of that with all the elements of people putting their hard-earned creativity to work and craft. It's a tough one. So congrats, man. I can't wait to check that out.
thanks very much. And for people who want to start a collection or want to start collecting, what is the best advice that you would like to pass on to those folks?
Collect something that you're passionate about, that you like. If you're just collecting for the sake of collecting, the games break a lot, so it's going to become a lot more daunting and more of a nuisance when they break down, and you're not going to have that passion to fix it. So definitely collect something that you like or you think you might like, and if not, maybe pass it on. But um, and know that it is going to break. So set up contingency for how are you going to fix this when it breaks? Are you going to watch YouTube's? Are you going to do it yourself, or are you going to have someone online that you could send something to? These old CRT TVs or monitors inside the games break constantly, so you'll need contingency for that. So just set up your contingencies and maybe find some things that you find interesting or you're passionate about.
Nice, nice. And last question, since this is retro podcast, what was your favorite retro product growing up in the 1980s?
Yeah, it's going to be well, does Atari 2600 count for a product?
Oh yes, yes, it definitely counts.
All right, so my favorite retro product was most definitely hands down the Atari 2600. I had to learn
Nice.
my flashcards, my times tables to earn that 2600, and I did. And remember playing which seems just such a crude game now, but I remember playing Combat. And I don't know if you're familiar, but it was a myriad of maybe 10 or 20 different versions of kind of the same game. You're these two tanks on each side, then there's a maze in between, then there's no maze, then the bullets bounce, and that was just mesmerized by that. So the Atari 2600 is deep rolling around in my consciousness, and that was 100% my favorite product from the 80s.
Actually sounds like a really cool product. I mean, just visualizing the tanks and everything. What would be really, really cool is that if you're familiar with this is not a video game, but this is a board game. I'm really not so sure how it works, but it's like football players, and then under the board, there's like a device that shakes
Like a
that
rumble
shakes,
or something.
yeah, that rumbles and that makes the football players move. It would be really cool to see that, but instead of football players, it was army tanks.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Okay.
Yeah, for what they lacked in technology back in the day, they made up for sometimes in the creativity, and a good indication of that is you look at some of these old arcade games, extremely crude lines, horrible sounds in some instances, but the artwork was just phenomenal. And you'd be a kid in an arcade with the right lighting and look at this and be like, I need to play that. And it really added to the fun of the game.